Hi, everyone. Welcome back. And now our next panel is going to be on pain and symptom management. We'll have Gynica joining us, EndoDiag, and Syrona. This panel will be moderated by Alexandra Alverne, and I'll hand it over to her once I give a brief bio of introduction. Alexandra?
Yes.
Yeah, you should be joining me on screen right now. Okay, it's great to have you here with us. So yeah, just a quick bio before I let you take over. She's a member of CNRS, the French National Center for Scientific Research, was previously an associate professor in biocultural anthropology and a fellow of Harris Manchester College at Oxford University. Alexandra seeks to answer questions such as why women discontinue modern contraception whilst in need of contraceptives, what the impact of infection on menstrual health is, how to better understand diversity in age at menopause, and what the impact of reproduction is on aging. She'll address some of these topics in her remarks on the panel. And yeah, Alexandra, I turn the stage over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to chair this panel. So should I explain?
We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Jesus. I don't know why you can't hear me.
No,
it's
doesn't
not
work.
No, mine is not on mute at all. That's a problem.
Anya says she can hear you.
Chantal can hear me as
well. Maybe if people could quickly write in the chat so we know if it's most people can. It works? Her audio works? Okay. I'm so sorry. I'll let you speak then because I'm the problem, obviously.
Okay, great. So so thank you very much for having me. I'm really happy to be here tonight. So my understanding is that I'll start with a quick talk about my work, and then we'll hear from our guest speakers for about 15 minutes, followed by 50 minutes of discussion between us, and then it'll be open for Q&A. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. If hopefully that's going to work as well. So I'm an academic. I'm an academic, and my background is in evolution, really. And so from an evolutionary perspective, the question you ask is, why do females menstruate? I'm just worried that people can't hear me, but hopefully it works. So you might not know this, but actually menstruation is quite rare in mammals. You might think that your dog menstruates, but actually it's from the vagina, not from the uterus. So why is that? Well, yeah, just to be clear, menstruation has evolved on in a few mammals, in particular some primate species, some rodents, and some bats. So the question is why this has evolved. And the current hypothesis is the idea of the choosy uterus hypothesis. So basically, in non-menstruating species, the implantation reaction is controlled by the embryo, while in a menstruating species, the implantation reaction is controlled by the mother, which allows avoiding investing in a compromised embryo. So that's the current hypothesis. And the question is, how does the uterus gets to be choosy? How does that work? And it works through the cyclical regulation of immunity. So on this slide, you can see the depiction of the endometrium, as you can see in the classic cycle. And you can see arrows as well, purple arrows, and those arrows show whether there is an inflammatory reaction or anti-inflammatory reaction. So just after ovulation, when there is a 1, there is an inflammatory reaction selecting for the embryo. Then it's followed by an anti-inflammatory reaction in 2, which allows for the implantation of an embryo. And if there hasn't been any conception, progesterone falls, and that triggers a massive inflammatory reaction that leads to menstruation in 3. So here menstruation is seen as a byproduct of this implantation reaction. But the point I want to make really is that rather than seeing the cycle as a cycle of hormones, we should see it as a cycle of immunity. And that has consequences for how we think about female health. So about 2 years ago, I've written this paper with a colleague working at CLU, trying to investigate evidence for the idea that female health might be best conceptualized as cyclical. And I found a few papers showing that disease susceptibility and disease severity might vary across the different phases of the cycle. So, for instance, susceptibility to cardiovascular disease is increased during the inflammatory phases of the cycle, like menstruation and the premenstrual phase, while the severity of some autoimmune disease might be decreased in the anti-inflammatory phase of the cycle, more towards the just after ovulation in the secretory phase. But bottom line, there isn't too much on this, and we're really lacking large-scale data on this question. And you can also ask about the female cycling life history. So over your lifetime, you might experience different amount of menstrual cycles and therefore be exposed to different amount of inflammation, depending on your use of contraceptives or having babies or not, or use of HRT, menarche, etc. And that in turn can influence your inflammatory load over your lifetime and shape aging and the age at which you might develop chronic disease. Okay, so really from an evolutionary perspective, the point is that health is only a mean to the end of reproduction. And if we want to understand health, we have to understand reproduction and connect the two. And that leads me to a current study I'm doing with two colleagues at Oxford, trying to understand the relationship between the COVID-19 pandemic and women's reproductive health, trying to link up the two. So we've run a UK Facebook campaign with over 26,000 participants over the last months. It's a retrospective study, it's only questionnaire data, but I just wanted to share with you some preliminary results. So some of the results we know already. So on this graph, you can see the extent to which those variables here it's reproductive phase, might increase the risk of developing long COVID or short COVID. Whatever is on the right side of the blue vertical line is a positive or increasing effect, increasing the risk. Whatever is on the left side is decreasing it. So you can see here that if you're perimenopausal or menopausal, the risk to develop long COVID is increased by quite a lot, between 25 and 40%. So this we sort of know already, but there's lots of cycle data that we haven't looked at, or there's only a very few papers on the topic. So we've looked at cycle lengths, for instance, and whether you have short or long or irregular cycle lengths. And you can see here that having short cycle lengths, here it's below 24 days, increase the risk of developing short COVID by about 20%. The number of babies you've delivered as well has an impact on the risk of developing both short COVID and long COVID, and that is controlled for age and BMI. You can see here that as the number of babies increase, your risk to develop COVID increases as well. And finally, just another result to link up with the guest speakers after me, pre-existing conditions such as PCOS or endometriosis or uterine polyps also increase the risk of developing long COVID here. So those are preliminary results. I need to do a lot of tests around those, but my message here is that we need to think about all those variables when we think about risk factors for non-reproductive health, because the two interact. Another question we had was, what is the impact of the infection on cycles? And here I'm showing you results on premenstrual cramps. And so we asked people whether they had more or less or no change in cramps over the last year. And you can see that people in the COVID positive group reports an increase in the amount of premenstrual cramps, more so than people in the COVID negative group. There's an increase in 10 points or more, 11 points. And that's a result I found previously with my work with CLUE on premenstrual syndrome using cycle data, and it was on sexually transmitted infection and how they would exacerbate premenstrual symptoms. So that's it for me. It's a very short introduction, but it's about this idea that by thinking of women's health as cyclical, we can ask novel questions and novel hypotheses to test and learn, produce new knowledge. Next, we're going to have very interesting speakers. I'm really looking forward to hear what they have to say. So I think we're going to start with Dr. Pruchi Sagiv, who serves as the VP and Research and Development at Gynica, a medical company researching and developing cannabinoid solutions to target gynecological symptoms and disease. She has over 15 years of experience in various aspects of pharmaceutical development, including preclinical and clinical studies, regulatory affairs, and IP. Over the last 10 years, Dr. Pruchi Sagiv has led scientific operations in multiple cannabis-based drug companies, including Calithera, Talent Biotech, Stero Biotech, and Bold Pharma. At Gynica, she is responsible for the development of cannabis-based solution in the women's health field. She also serves as a director of tech transfer at More Research Applications, where she is responsible for the pharma and diagnostic department. So we'll hear shortly Dr. Pruchi Sagiv. Next, after her, we'll have Cécile Réal, who is the CEO and co-founder of EndoDiag, a company developing new endometriosis diagnostic solutions for healthcare professionals. These solutions are intended to contribute to a better endometriosis diagnosis, a more personalized patient management, more efficient treatment options, and fertility strategy. Cécile has 20 years of experience in the medical industry and management of medical startup companies. She is the president and co-founder of Bioprofile, leading innovative orthopedic implants. She also served as COO at Ariana Pharma. She's the co-founder and CEO of EndoDiag since its creation in 2011. She's the president of Medicalps, and she's been trained as a biomedical engineer in France, and she's also the MBA laureate for Europe for the Cartier Women Initiative Award in 2012 and named Femme Entrepreneur 2016 by France Biotech. And last, I think I'm hoping I get the order right. I apologize if I'm mistaken. Last, we'll have Anya, who is the co-founder of Sora Health. She initially started her career at Goldman Sachs in London and then became a life science venture capital at IP Group. Her more recent role has been at Illumina, setting up their European genomics investment vehicle, investing in 7 companies so far. Having spent so much time investing in life sciences companies and operating, it was a natural step for her to combine her personal passion in gynecological health with her professional expertise in scientific development and commercializations. Chantel Bell is the co-founder of Syrona. Syrona was started by Anya Roy and Chantel Bell, classmates at Cambridge University, while studying at the Department of Biotech and Chemical Engineering. Syrona aims is to democratize gynecological healthcare. Chronic health issues such as endometriosis have been overlooked by the medical industry for hundreds of years. Their mission is to provide accessible care to marginalized communities such as women, trans, non-binary people, and so forth, and has been created by 2 people of color, keeping in mind the challenges this community face. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and hoping that still online. Yes. Okay. It's a bit disconcerting to use hoping for the first time. So should we start with Dr. Pruchi Sagiv?
Yeah, hi. Let me see how to actually.
So you can share your screen at the bottom of the screen. There should be an icon with
I actually don't see. Sorry, I don't see how to
Do you see on your screen next on the right side of the mic? At the bottom of our pictures.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you click on that, great.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Great. So thank you all. I would like to introduce you a little bit to the world of cannabinoids and cannabis and women's health, and why it's so important actually to do preclinical and clinical testing. So as you might know, because cannabis is such a hype, cannabis has been used for thousands of years already in order to treat women's health diseases. For example, bleeding and cramps and pain. Even Queen Victoria used it. And also today we know that cannabis is used as self-management. It's the first choice of women as self-management, for example, for endometriosis. But what's the problem? There's a big problem with that. The problem is that there are over 2,000 or a lot more of different cannabis strains or cannabis cultivars, which means that each cultivar or each strain has a different composition of cannabinoids. We have 144 cannabinoids like THC, CBD, CBG, 200 different terpenes. So actually, cannabis is not a drug. Cannabis is 2,000 drugs. And there's no consensus about which is the best strain or cannabinoid or composition of cannabinoids to treat each indication. So there's a lot to do in this. There's a lot to do. There's an unmet need in order to find preclinical and clinical scientific evidence on which is the best to use for each indication. And not only that, safety and toxicity is very important. Standardized a solution in order to use in women's health and other indications as well. And that's the part of cannabis. Of course, it's very, very important to find solutions based on cannabis for women's health, like painful menstruation, painful sex, endometriosis, etc. And that is what we're doing at Gynica. At Gynica, we're doing a lot of preclinical and clinical testing in order to find the best composition of cannabinoids in order to give the safest and the most efficient formulation. We're also doing a lot of formulations in order to treat these different women's health indications. So how cannabis...
You're not in a full screen mode. Do you think you can...
Sorry?
You're not in a full screen mode. I wonder if you could... It's okay. It doesn't matter.
I actually see it in full screen.
Okay. We don't. It's okay.
Okay. Do you see it in full screen now?
Yeah. No, but it's okay. It's better like that. It's good.
Okay. So actually, how does the cannabis influence our system? It does through the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system is a network of many receptors, like CB1 and CB2 receptors that are in all our body, and cannabinoids, like anandamide, that works like cannabis, that bind each other and activate. The main role of the endocannabinoid system is homeostasis, but it also has important roles, for example, in mood, metabolism, immune system response, pain. Pain is a lot of what it does. And dysfunctions to these systems are associated with many diseases. And one of the most important things is why cannabis is so important in women. And it's because the endocannabinoid system is present in all the organs of the female. In fact, anandamide, which is the major endocannabinoid, has the highest concentration in our uterus. So it's very, very important. Also, the endocannabinoid system controls the hormones for everything that has to do with our reproduction, which means that altered endocannabinoid system expression is associated with many problems such as reduced fertility, problems with pregnancy, abortions, and actually high levels of endocannabinoids suppress the release of hormones. And this is very, very important, because if we see cannabinoids work like endocannabinoids, you can take, for example, THC, which is the cannabinoid that everyone likes because it has psychoactive effects. THC does the same as endocannabinoids, and it can suppress the release of hormones. So girls, be careful. If you want to get pregnant, it can cause a lot of problems. So the fact that we have this endocannabinoid system in our organs makes it a target for cannabis treatment. So today we're developing for 3 main indications, which is dysmenorrhea or menstrual pain, for dyspareunia or painful intercourse, and for endometriosis. Of course, there are many other diseases that we can treat. And the main one is endometriosis. Endometriosis is when the lining of the endometrium, or the lining of the uterus, instead of being shed out by menstruation, it comes again up, and it actually adheres to other organs in our body, causing a lot of pain, causing a lot of pain in menstruation and in between periods, diarrhea, nausea, problems with pregnancy, and 10% of women suffer from endometriosis. Endometriosis is very well known of a problem of the endocannabinoid system. So there are many people trying to understand exactly what is going on, what's the mechanism of action, and what should we do. And the way we do it is that we take, for example, right now, in vitro and in vivo models of endometriosis, including inflammation, because in inflammation in endometriosis, there's a lot of inflammation. And we try different fractions of cannabis, different cannabinoids, and different combinations, specific combinations that we think that they will help. So for example, just 2 examples of all the work that we're doing. If you take IL-6, which is a cytokine, a pro-inflammatory cytokine, you can see here that different cannabinoids reduce the amount of IL-6. On the other hand, if you take specific combinations of these cannabinoids, you can see, for example, that combination 2 really, really decreases the amount of interleukin-6, which means that you're really reducing the inflammation. And just another example, if you see here, this is a agarose spot, a sugar spot. And these cells that you can see here, these cells are endometriosis cells that really like to get into the sugar. And if you put here THC, for example, inside the spot of sugar, cells, they do not go in, which means that this cannabinoid can control the invasiveness or the migration of these cells. But the last thing that I wanted to tell you is that although we're doing a lot of work and we see really, really good results, cannabis is not for everyone, and it should be taken with precaution. For example, THC and CBD, everyone is taking for everything. It's not benign and can really cause harmful effects like cognition. There are many certain populations that we have to take in consideration. I was telling you about women in their fertility years. THC really might impair ovulation and pre-implantation. Pregnant women, please, no cannabis. Young adults, it can affect IQ. It has a lot of interactions with other medications, so it's very, very important to really understand what are we doing, what population are we treating, and what can we give. And, just to be careful. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Say. Just before we go to our next speaker, I just had a quick question about THC versus CBD. Like are you testing just CBD or CBD plus THC, or do you see?
No.
So.
No, we are testing many cannabinoids. At the beginning, we started to test different strains. Then we went to fractions. Then we went to take the best fractions and went to isolate the different cannabinoids and started playing with mixing the different cannabinoids and terpenes to get the best result. So we are using also many other CBG, THCV. You have 144 to play.
Well, it's fascinating. I'll ask you more questions afterwards about your work, but I'm thinking maybe it's better we all together for the discussion, and so we should proceed with our next speaker. So that should be Cécile. Yep.
Hello.
So over to you. You know how to share your screen?
Yeah.
Great. And then we don't see it in full screen.
Okay, it's in full screen mode.
Yeah, when I did my full screen mode, I couldn't see anyone else. So
yeah. Should we go on like that?
Yeah, if you're in full screen mode yourself, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we are working on. So I've co-founded this company EndoDiag in 2011. We're a group of 20 people working in Paris, and we are exclusively working on endometriosis diagnosis. We have a team mixed with biologists, data scientists, engineers, and we have since the beginning of the company tried to develop international collaboration, both with academics and also with clinical teams. I think you're very familiar with endometriosis, but as just was explained before, it's 1 in 10 women are suffering from it, 180 million more or less worldwide, and with the two symptoms, which are chronic pelvic pain and infertility. We can hear more and more about endometriosis, but still there's a lot of unknown. A lot of people who don't know about endometriosis or who have very limited knowledge. There is a big issue because of the late diagnosis. Estimates this delay of approximately 8 years. And it's a very complex disease. The more and more we speak about syndrome more than a disease, and there are still a lot of mechanisms that we don't know about endometriosis. What we believe since we've started the company, or why we've started the company, was really that if we are able to do a simpler and earlier diagnosis, we can, even if we don't have yet all the tool for the disease, the therapeutics, but we can really improve the disease management for the patients. And the way we are working on that is in 3 different areas. The first one is to limit and try to limit the disease progression and the organ damage with an early diagnostic tool and to provide that. The second one is to focus on enable a personalized medicine. There are very different types of endometriosis, and we believe that if we have access to those, or if the clinicians have access to those information, it will help them to manage and orientate the treatment of the patients. The last one is to help to support the rise of new therapies and to share the experience, the knowledge, the things we have built since 10 years on the disease itself. I still believe that there is a need to contribute to raise awareness on the disease knowledge towards patients, health organization, and health policymakers. To translate that, I would say in the program we are focusing in, so the main priority for us is really to work on this early diagnosis. We have 2 projects going on in the field. We work both endometrium with the goal of developing IVD test for a diagnosis of the disease. We also work the second program and second step on this prognostic and drug susceptibility test. We call that the endogram. And the last one is we are only doing that through collaboration with either biotech groups or academic groups to help to do some preclinical drug testing or target assessments and to work on patient stratification with them. Over the last 10 years, we have built a very interesting biobank with tissues, but also associated data. And we also built some collaboration around this tool. And today, where we are in terms of development, 10 years time for us since we have started, but there is still a lot of work to do. We are just finalizing a very large clinical study that we've built since 3 years now. We have recruited 1,500 patients in mainly North America, Europe, and Middle East. This will be completed in next June, a few days now, and the goal for us is really to validate at a large scale and very heterogeneous population those early diagnosis tests that we're developing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cécile. Just ask you quickly how so I'm an academic, so I don't know very much industry world, but how do you measure success? How do you know when it works?
For us, the success is when what we do is, for me, the driver is when it helps the patient and the physicians. So the success is when those tools will be accessible, and it's a long way. And it's why, starting from the academic work, then those validation, then the regulatory path, market access path, it's a pretty long run. But for me, the success is only when it helps patients in their disease management.
And do you think it's in sight now, like you saying this is?
Yeah, we're very eager and excited about all the data we're generating now, and we will finalize in the next month. Then there is the industrial development of the kits or of the test, and that's still a year and a half probably of development.
Cool. Okay, we'll have many more questions for you afterwards. And I think now we're gonna give the floor to Chantal, if she is with us. Oh, Anya. Okay.
Hi. Thanks for having us. I think Chantal. Sorry.
Okay, hi, Chantal.
I'm here. I'm just gonna share my screen. Don't know if you can see this. Can you see my screen?
And do you think you can? Yes.
Yeah, that works. Okay,
yeah.
Perfect.
Fantastic. Great. So thank you so much for joining Sora Health, a digital health platform creating digital solutions for people with chronic gynecological health conditions. We've just entered the market a few months ago with our flagship product, which is Sora, in the UK and Ireland. So I know there's a lot of students in the room today, so I just wanted to give a quick backstory on how we met and how we came up with the idea of Syrona. So we met during our master's course at the University of Cambridge. It was a course Department of Chemical Engineering and Biotechnology, and also the Judge Business School. But we really connected on our shared negative experiences when it came to our gynae health. So it comes from a personal space. Anya has a background in finance industry. Business, and myself, I come from a genetics background, so we kind of merged our two expertise together to create Sora Health. What we found is that conditions are very underserved and under-researched. There are many pain points which are not addressed, and because it's a chronic nature of these types of conditions, it can go on for many, many years. So what we found is that it's costly to employers, society, and healthcare systems. And in their life will kind of go through a chronic gynae condition, whether it be endometriosis, PCOS, uterine fibroids, or even menopause. So it affects each and every one of us, and it should be taken seriously now. And even more importantly, a lot of these conditions are interlinked. So there's a lot of people with endometriosis, for example, and there's links to infertility, same for PCOS, which also links to heart disease. And it's important to have one single platform where these conditions can be addressed.
I guess, as Chantal really mentioned, endometriosis is our first sort of indication that we have been working on. But really, the problem is as big as diabetes. And if you've seen the diabetes market, it's absolutely exploded. And you've seen some really big players, digital health players like Omada, Livongo, doing a lot of great work in the diabetes market. But given that, the endometriosis market is just as big, we think there's a huge research funding gap. So endometriosis gets about $1 in research funding for every $200 for diabetes. And, I think one of the things that we do as a company is really campaign about the gender sort of research and health gap that we see. And so in terms of, I think we've seen some really esteemed panel members speak today about endometriosis and their work in endometriosis, and the fact that the diagnostic timeline is really long is very concerning. So it's 7.5 years on average. In the UK, it's about 8 years, which is not great. The government in the UK actually has, called upon healthcare systems and other key ecosystem players to reduce this time to 4 years. Now, whilst this may sound like a big reduction, you really have to ask whether if it were a different condition, would 4 years be acceptable? And the fact is, we get told endometriosis is niche, and it's not niche. It affects 176 million people with uteruses worldwide. It affects, not just women, but the trans community, the non-binary community, the marginalized communities that people don't speak about. And that's something that we're trying to change. I guess our focus, will always remain in how do we bring together digital health, but at the same time be embedded within clinical research. And we do this by actively having partnerships with various sort of universities. Our PIs are scattered in the UK, but also the US. And we want to extend our portfolio in the same direction. And so we have our secondary focus on polycystic ovarian syndrome. Our solution is Sora. Sora is an app that is available on the market, which is a vertically integrated platform for chronic gynae conditions with a first focus on endometriosis and PCOS. What we do can be summarized in 4 main pillars. So we do tracking and monitoring. We provide access to specialists. We look at treatment and condition management, but also the softer element, which is building communities. So if I just stress on some of these aspects individually, with the tracking and monitoring piece, what we do is collect digital biomarkers, both in terms of symptoms, lifestyle, hormone, etc., and then use that to provide clinical insights. And we also connect with Fitbit and Apple Watch to consume interesting data points from that. We've gone through a medical device certification process, so it's software as a medical device. I guess the next aspect is really about moving through the entire patient journey, and that's why we created this vertically integrated platform that goes beyond just tracking that a lot of apps can do today, to provide real-time access to specialists. So this is a marketplace with experts, really, and that includes nutritionists, mental health specialists, and also gynecologists and endocrinologists. The reason why we say this is important is that this is not just a condition that affects your physical well-being, but it also affects your mental well-being. About 90% of people diagnosed with endometriosis have a very negative sort of like mental health support system in place as well, and they definitely require this because this is a chronic condition. We also partner with fertility clinics because endometriosis and PCOS are a couple of conditions which are the biggest sort of factors of female fertility issues. So these are the things that need to be addressed upstream. The next aspect is around treatment and management, and so what we do is partner with diagnostic sort of like labs to provide kits, home testing kits, and this isn't for endometriosis, by the way. This is for fertility related issues, so looking at your hormones and etc. But we also then see how prescriptions work for various patients, and so there's a large data set that we collect around real world evidence for these patients who are prescribed to various drugs, and it only works for certain subsets of patients. I guess, to kind of like really tie this together, the softest element of the app is the community, but this is super important. We've seen we provide polls and real-time feedback, and people share like tips and questions and and build support systems. So really, the community is a very active element and feature of the app itself. So that's really Syrona's solution around Sora in a nutshell. And maybe we'll tell you a bit more about the app itself. So the app was launched in March in the UK, but also in Ireland in May. We're also launching in Germany and Switzerland in the autumn. So stay tuned and please download it or follow us on our Instagram handle, Sora Health, or sign up to our newsletter on our website so that you can keep track of the interesting things that we're working on. I guess to wrap up, really, what we're trying to do is build a really rich, large data set around women's health. And we've seen that women have not been included in clinical trials, and as women's health conditions are, as I said, under research. So we're doing the tiny bit that we can do as a company to really create that shift. So on that note, I'll hand it over to you, Alex.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Thank you very much. Yeah, I just had a quick question. So your app is integrated. You can collect data on hormones and biological markers. How does that work? Is it because you work with doctors, or women enter the data directly?
Yeah, so we do home testing kits. So we actually send out these finger prick tests, and we get some of this hormone data sent off to our lab partners who analyze it and provide the results. And we integrate it with patient-reported data alongside clinical data and combine those things together.
Right. Okay. But you don't need to have a condition to download the app. You can.
No, you don't. Yeah, no, you don't. And I think this is the beauty of it, because I think a lot of people actually don't even know they have this issue, right? Because a lot of people have been told this is just period pain, and they're living with this debilitating condition. I mean, if there are people in the audience who have chronic pelvic pain, please, go speak to your doctor and get the help that you require.
Okay, so now I'm going to open up the discussion between us. I have a number of set questions, but I've thought about a few more. You can all jump in if you want to answer. So the first one is, as you know, as you've shown, women's health has been overlooked for a long time. Why do you think it took such a long time to develop diagnostic tools tailored to women's disease?
I have a view on this, and
Sure.
The panel can definitely jump in as well. If you don't provide enough research funding for these conditions, then it's hard to build diagnostic tools. And the second aspect is women have been excluded from clinical trials for a very long period of time. If you don't enable research, you're unable to find something new and create new innovation. So I think that's kind of one of the reasons, but also inherently, like, it's a very complex system. So you need a lot of stakeholders to provide their views to make it happen. So this is patient voices need to be heard, clinician, biotech and pharma, they all need to collaborate together. But those are things that need to happen for any sort of like condition, really.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Just an anecdote. When I started to work on this project on endometriosis, my friends from the pharma industry was asking me, why are you working on a rare disease? And I was like, what are you talking about? And they say, yeah, and it's a niche market. Why do you spend energy there? And I was very shocked, and I think it explained also well how it was. I mean, 10 years ago, it's not so long ago. I think on the fundings, as you explained, were very limited. And obviously, as we discussed about a very complex system, we need to mix teams and to collaborate a lot. And if you have very limited fundings, few teams working here and there, it's very hard to organize that. And I also think that the funding, again, when we started, there was no box to tick for funding application for those kind of disease. And I think we had to push and to explain a lot to raise awareness before the funding starts to come, I think, for project. I think things are moving and changing, but it didn't start so long ago.
Funny that they say niche market when we are more than 50% of the population.
Yeah, but it was crazy.
So do you mean do you also think there's an issue around the social attitudes towards, women, where in the case of contraception, for instance, when it was, the logic was all about population control, controlling bodies, while more recently it's more about women's rights. And so there's more room now. They put the ticking box because now we start thinking about people's rights in different ways. But
I definitely agree with that, Alex. I definitely think like the contraceptive narrative has changed and evolved, not as much as like we'd like it to, because there are still women being put on contraceptives that are not necessarily right for them, and there are lots of like startups trying to address that area, definitely. But from our perspective, it's been very interesting because we've seen a lot more conversation around women's health from the investor side as an offshoot of the Me Too movement, which has no real connection per se with women's health, but I think it was talking about rights. And so definitely, I mean, the narrative is changing, but there's a lot more that can be done in this space.
And just last question around that issue: do you experience cross-country differences? You probably work not only in the UK but in the US. Cecilia, you work in France as well. I've just moved back to France, and I certainly feel that the attitude towards women's issue is not the same as in the UK. And so I wonder how you negotiate that. And there's different levels of patriarchy around the world, obviously. What's your view on your ability to roll out your company and your vision cross-country?
No, I think tech is breaking barriers. That's definitely true. And technology is sort of like breaking down some of these cultural barriers that exist. And even though we're a UK-based company, we see a lot of requests from the Middle East and from Asia. So definitely, like, women's health is important everywhere. But I think technology is helping and enabling some parts of the world change perception potentially. As I always say, we still have a long way to go, but I think we're making like progress in the right direction. But these are like really interesting things about culture and perception because in women's health, because we've been hard coded for such a long time to be a certain way or to act a certain way, to use contraceptives or not to. And there's a lot of cultural like taboo around menstruation and like topics around women's health. They don't become like chats at a dinner table. There's still so much stigma even in a first world country, right? So I think we still have a lot of things to do, but I think there are people doing great work in terms of like advocacy, and we see a lot of people doing some great work in breaking those barriers down.
Yeah, I think
that also one problem is that for many years, mainly men were gynecologists and scientists, and they didn't understand the pain that not giving birth, but just menstruation or all of these problems. So that was a big deal.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. When we started to try to explain what we wanted to do, when we say it's a condition, it was like, who cares? And then when we start to explain, but half of the women have infertility issues, and they start to get interested in the subject. When we were talking about infertility, I think it has changed, but it was terrible. And I remember at the time working and talking with patient groups and patient advocacy groups, and I was sharing this experience, and they said, "Oh, but you should always start with infertility, because otherwise, if you have a main group in front of you, they won't really listen to what you are talking about." And I said, "But the pain is terrible." And I say, "Yeah, but you need to first to get the attention, speak about fertility. You can explain." And it was very frustrating. But I think it's as you mentioned, Anya, there were a lot of work from the patient advocacy group. I think have been very and especially with the new tech, able to change the lines there. They've been more professional, more organized, and more open also to discussion and collaboration. And I think it's helping a lot to move faster on this level.
Okay, then my next question is about the different steps on the road to developing solutions. So for some of you, it's about early diagnosis, and it seems to be a key starting point. So I had a question about endometriosis in particular, whether you've discovered key risk factors that people should be, aware of more widely, and beyond the lack of appropriate technology. So you've mentioned funding, and are there any other obstacle to early diagnosis? And I guess with my evolutionary hat on, my question is also, we're dealing with diagnosis, which is obviously hugely important, but what about the causes? Why do women get endometriosis in the first place? Anyway, there's many different questions. You picked the one you want.
But on the why, unfortunately, we don't know, and when we will know, it will change a lot on the early diagnosis treatments. I think to come back to one of the big point was the $1 invested in endo versus the $200 invested in the diabetes. Obviously, we're globally more aware about the mechanism involved in diabetes than we are in the even why do we have endo, and there is still work to do there. I think another point is the awareness. It's again better, but still knowing it, and I think it's there is a need for raising awareness amongst general population, but also amongst the medical community. You can still hear doctors say, "You have painful period, doesn't matter, fine, it's okay, you have nothing," and I think it's there is work to be done there to improve that.
This is a slightly different view, but a lot of endometriosis diagnosis can happen in secondary care, but you have to go to a GP or a primary care physician first, and often, they don't have the same sort of like level of training as an endometriosis surgeon would, who would automatically be able to, from a bunch of symptoms and like just generally understanding the disease really well, be able to fast track someone for a diagnosis. And the first line diagnostic is laparoscopic surgery. Healthcare systems are not incentivized to use laparoscopic surgery as a first line diagnostic. Someone builds a blood test or a simple scan to do an endo, and I think MRI scans can work to a certain extent, not for all patients, but potentially some. But if there was a simple blood test, then yeah, I think you have a solution for endometriosis.
But I think also digital tools are very important to, as you did, help with the primary care and with a better patient knowledge. And I think it's all bricks that will change the situation. Biology, imaging, digital platform and markers. And I think if we combine that, then we can be much faster than just working on each metric. And we can help more with awareness doing that, I think.
So then I'm going to jump to another question, which is about what makes women tech special, and is it because it engages with women's health issue or any other aspect you think are particularly unique? But what I'm thinking now is, okay, now we have many more FemTech. How do you manage so that it's not all about competition, but you can cooperate and collaborate to speed up innovation? It must be difficult from a purely business perspective.
Yeah, it's been overlooked for so long. I think there's an opportunity to really collaborate, and I think working in silo and everyone collecting the individual data sets is fantastic. So as FemTech, we should come together and really work together to create solutions.
But then what is it about FemTech compared to, what is the other one then, MainTech, or?
It's just how.
Okay.
But funny, we get asked this, and who knows what the nomenclature is anymore. No one knows. I don't know, but they do raise a lot of money. MainTech, if that's what you want to call it, they raise a lot of money. So I don't know what they're called necessarily, but yeah.
This gives us the opportunity for women to take care of our own health, I guess.
Yeah, built by sort of like women for women. So I think it's an opportunity for us to change the narrative. Sorry, you're right.
You must have a lot of men as well in your company, right? I mean, we have a lot of supporting men partners who also.
We do, and they're very well versed in women's health now. So they're very they're very educated in this space. So we have a lot of technologists who are very educated in this space and have some very interesting ideas and hypotheses. So I think for us to win in this space, obviously I think the larger gynae health condition companies should collaborate, possibly find mutually beneficial ways to exchange data, and put together pharma partnerships, but also ensure that there are other key stakeholders in the ecosystem, whether it's male investors or others that you can still bring on your journey. I think that's really important for the success overall. But I always think the more gynae health becomes focused, the more noise we make, the more we get heard. So competition is good.
Yeah. Of course. It's the right balance, I guess, between competition and cooperation. It's just the two sides of the same coin. Okay, so healthcare is now moving towards, personalized medicine. rather than the one-size-fits-all approach. That means considering the full range of diversity and the represented group. And I was wondering to what extent you're able to be inclusive in your work and really work towards personalized diagnostic. And I'm asking this as well because in the survey I presented, I really wanted to have minorities, but the percentage in the UK is actually quite small. So you need a huge sample size to be able to say anything about those minorities. And in the end, I'm not sure I'll be able to. So how do you deal with that?
I think it's very challenging. We in our 1500 clinical study, we wanted to have this diversity. We have included groups from Middle East for that. We have included groups from Africa, south part of Africa, but even with that, it's still unbalanced from what we were expecting, and I think it has to be designed at the beginning with collaboration if you want to achieve this goal. Otherwise, I think it's very difficult.
Yeah, I agree. I think you have to be quite intentional to include underrepresented groups, so almost targeting those groups and including them in the discussion early on. And I think starting from the very beginning, where you're designing a product or you're kind of designing a clinical trial, be where the difference is made rather than an afterthought.
Yeah, and it can go as basic as how you write something. And so like, our website, for instance, we had someone from the trans community write out our website. So you have to be hyper aware of the vocabulary that you use, because there's so much everyday speak that marginalizes communities, and you can lose people from coming onto your platform, being a part of a clinical trial. So I think there's a lot of a requirement in terms of design, human-centered design, being very sensitive about the kind of language you use as well. So these are very subtle things, and it's not very, I wouldn't say maybe it's scientific, but I think for diversity in data set, even if you look at UK Biobank data, it's very poor in terms of diversity, very bad. And so it's not that we don't exist, like Chantal and I are trying to build a company, right? So representation matters. So yeah, I think we have a lot more to do in this space.
I just wanted to add, it's difficult as well. So for the survey I did, we specifically used the wording menstruating person. And we had so much backlash on Facebook. Oxford University doesn't know that women menstruate. Very angry messages. So however you phrase it, you have to also you have to go with what's right, but you have to be ready for the fact that you're never going to please everyone as well. But I completely agree that if you're not in the data, if you don't have statistics for particular groups, then in effect they don't exist. That's problematic. But hopefully that can change as well. I have a sort of a tricky question. As an academic, I can see you all engage with academics. What is your experience? I know it could be frustrating because research takes a long time. So I wonder what your experience has been and what you think is the most important when building a partnership between academia and the industry.
I've been doing a lot of work with academia. I think it's very, very important to do work together. It's a little bit longer, but we can do a lot of things, like basic of action.
Is it me or?
So my experience is very, very good.
Okay, good.
Yeah, maybe to share more. I think it's very, for me, my experience is that it's very important to explain, to collaborate as soon as possible, because I think the constraints from the industry are different, and I think it's very important to be involved early, and maybe sometimes to help orientate some of the work and to really explain what we want to achieve, what will be our constraint on the way, so that it's really a collaborative in a defined, I would say, environment and goal, even if obviously research has to be pretty open. But I think to explain that and explain what we can do, what we can't do, what as an industry company we have as a constraint in just regulatory environment, for example, or a technical constraint. If we do that well early, I think the collaborations are very efficient.
Okay. So I have time for a few more questions. Oriana, you can tell me in the chat.
There's a problem with Alex.
You can't hear me? No? Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
So a big part for you of your work is to develop technologies, but another part is to engage others. So how do you proceed in terms of your interaction with doctors, patients, and public engagement? And is there room for citizen science in your project? So not the technology part, the sort of human outreach part. Tell us a bit.
Part of our, because we're a digital health application, a huge part of it is citizen science, because they tell us, what are the things that we have missed, we have not catered towards in their patient journey, symptoms that we didn't know were part of the condition because we have a feature to add their own symptom. So there's so much interesting data that we collect from patients, and we have a very clear sort of opt-in and opt-out for research purposes clause, consent. We ask for consent right when you sign up to the app. And the beautiful thing is, over 90% of people who have signed up to our platform have opted in for research. So there's a huge amount of patient advocacy in this space. There are lots of people who want to collaborate and also want to contribute to development of science. So I'd say most of our work is citizen science, but then we also do sort of partnerships, research partnerships with various universities, both in the UK and the US, for different aspects. But yeah, I definitely think citizen science is underrated.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to add, from the healthcare side, involving gynecologists, physicians, and really understanding the healthcare system, our tool will almost impact their work. So it's about involving them in the process from the start.
We build, and patient groups, collaborations and discussions, I think, to understand the patient journey, the symptoms, not as a medical description or not even as a scientific description, but as a patient, what I'm going through. It was very, I think, useful and important. And I think it's, I've been very developed several companies, but it's the first time in this specific area where we receive a lot of emails from patients, and they just say, "How can I help you? Where can I come to give you blood? Can I enter your trial?" And the demand is very high, and I think it's we have to organize it, because it's not as simple as that to involve everybody. But I think it's a very and it's a big part of what we're doing.
Okay, I'm going to ask another two last questions, and then we'll have a question from the student, or you can post them. Okay, I have a cheeky one. I don't know if you have social sciences students in the room, maybe not, but the view in social sciences is that we've medicalized women's health, that women need not be reduced to their reproductive organs, that we're pathologizing the whole thing. Obviously, I'm not talking, I'm not endorsing this view, but I'm just wondering what's your answer to that. Well, it could be around PMS or menopause more than endometriosis. Issues like menopause, for instance, can be seen as a normal process of a woman's life in other populations. And so it's in the Western world that we see it as a disease, really, and everything is a malfunction for women. So I just wonder what you have to say, in reply to the social sciences view.
At the end of the day, from a medical point of view or a clinical point of view, everyone should live a good quality of life, and so if menopause cuts off your ability to do so, then it is a problem that requires treating. If it doesn't affect you, that's fine. But a lot of I really struggle with categorization or judgment on any part for these conditions, because that is the root cause of evil in my eyes. Because quality of life is something that no one should be denied from. So that's why with healthcare there's so much stipulation around, does a drug improve your quality of life? Does an intervention improve your quality of life? And I think everyone, on the panel, is talking about or working on things that improve the quality of life for a patient. So yeah, that's my view on it.
Okay. Just the last one, over the last year, because of the pandemic, women have experienced less good healthcare and less reproductive rights worldwide. And so how did you then feel the need to do even more, or did it change anything in the way you approach your work?
I've been working with other companies in e-health, and I've seen actually the contrary. This year has been amazing in terms of taking care of women in their houses and monitoring pregnancy, like a handheld ultrasound that you can do at home whenever you want. So this year, I think that has opened a lot of opportunities for women's health, healthcare. I think it has been amazing.
Okay, there's a question from the audience, especially for students. The financial part of launching a new enterprise is always challenging. How did you cope with that?
I always say, look up accelerators, incubators. They can be really helpful. Speak to your university, sort of like TTOs. They've done this before, so they can be really helpful. But I think those are good starting points. I think when you're thinking about, as a student, thinking about entrepreneurship.
And I think after it's to build a project and get helped, as you said, by incubators, by other entrepreneurs. We help younger entrepreneurs and to help build a plan and to then make sure that the plan makes sense. Because you will get funding if you convince the people about the feasibility of your project and the interest. And I think it's you should also ask other entrepreneurs who have been through, who are usually very happy to share their experience, how they did that, and help.
We have a last question on the legal difficulties of cannabis. I was wondering about this because it's quite hard to get CBD without THC, for instance. In some countries it's legal, in some, but not everywhere in Europe, for instance. How do you deal with that?
Well, yeah, that's a good question, because there are some regulations and it varies everywhere. So the reason we're doing so much preclinical and clinical testing is in order to comply with all the regulations. We are developing formulations that are without THC, for example, the problem of cannabis, and combinations with THC that we know that it works very well, of course, in pain. For different markers, we're thinking about going to the FDA. I have been already to the FDA several times discussing about cannabinoid development, and they're very open. I mean, if you do it on the right way, if, for example, you see that the PK of the drug when you give intravaginal is not like smoking, regulators are okay with it. So we are taking that in consideration when developing. And that's why clinical evidence is so important.
Great. So basically, I think the end sentence could be nothing's impossible. Just be enthusiastic and never give up, and you might change the world. I'm going to thank you all for participating. It was great talking to you. I hope maybe I can reach out to you later on. And I think that's the end of our panel.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.